Good morning, good day, and good evening, wherever you're at. We're ready to do our webinar, and for that, to make it happen first and foremost, as always, I want to thank my colleagues in our India Center in Mother Service Society, who makes this technically possible and who are always my heroes when it comes to putting together and coordinating forums like this. Then I would like to, with all of my heart, thank Roberto Poli for being a great partner in supporting me to make this happen. This is his big project, the Conference on Anticipation, yet the webinar I coordinated and started, and he supported me in making this happen. So Roberto, welcome and thank you very much. A note on the content and the nature of this forum. I will remind you that this is not a conference where we expect to reach any definitive conclusions, but rather more of a brainstorming forum in preparation for this wonderful conference upcoming in November at the University of Trento. Regarding the conference, as you can see, we have a conference page here pulled up with a marvelous organization that Roberto put together, co-organizing things as well as with WAAS, and multiple sessions. We have, in particular, two sessions that our WAAS fellows have organized. One of them is Anticipation and Deep Drivers for the New Paradigm, that was organized and convened by Garry Jacobs and Winston Megan, and one called Bring Forth Futures, which I have convened. So if you want to visit the website and look into those, as well as consider submitting your papers afterwards, you would be most welcome. We would really be appreciative of that. As a formal follow-up after the forum, please write to me at Mila Popovich at gmail.com, which you all have already received email from me, but also by all means we can have a cumulative summation of all those notes if you write to our staff at support@worldacademy.org. So this pretty much sets up in terms of form, and we can open the session now with, I will just put forth just a couple of preliminary comments as an introduction, and to sort of place on the table provocative questions or food for thought. So as Roberto Poli and Garry Jacobs and I discussed the conference as well as this forum, many wonderful comments came up, and I have always relied on Roberto's insight about the need to make the present much bigger, or sometimes, as I say, pregnant, so as to speak with a sense of possibility. I wanted to ask mostly just 2-3 questions. I wonder how we can anticipate future from the old mindset. That is, what is the relationship between the anticipation as faculty and practice and the framework, mental framework in which we exist as this particular worldview that we inhabit and create. So I wanted to ask about the mutually productive relationship between anticipation and practice and the emerging worldview. Then I ask, what kind of faculties do we need to develop and have in order to anticipate from this framework of understanding and acting? Anticipation and creation are processes. Is anticipation more of a reactive activity, or in a creative more of a proactive approach? Finally, I would like to socially contextualize the process and the practice of anticipation by asking, who gets to anticipate? Whose anticipation gets to be represented and brought to fruition? There are competing discourses, and we need to consider their relationship to the common future, but in particularly who can afford to participate and put forth their vision as a powerful and impactful stakeholder. In that sense, I would also like to note that to me, the process of anticipation as well as our own existence can be metaphorically represented as a silkworm transforming into butterfly, where we're producing this immensely thin and precarious thread, nonetheless very strong continuum thread from within ourselves as we go through this continual process of becoming as beings of continual becoming. So these are some of the notes that I wanted to put forth, hopefully poetically, as a question that anticipation comes into discussion between what is and what could be. And the bigger present, as Roberto calls it, is that one which is full of imaginative potential, capturing the friction between those two positions, what is and what could be, can actually be generative energy for change, a proactive impetus to use what is as the material for what will be, and again, in that continual state of becoming that our existence is. So with those thoughts and with those notes, I open the forum and welcome you all, and would like to call on Roberto Poli first to address the forum and also give his presentation.
I would like to present two basic aspects in my short introduction. What's happening now concerning anticipation, and a couple of ideas about what can be understood for anticipation. The interesting aspect is that from within a number of different fields, including psychology, anthropology, sociology, economics, and a few more other fields, during the past 3 years, so very recently, a number of major papers have been published. We have a paper by Martin Seligman and the collaborators. Seligman has been president of the American Psychological Association. Aruna Padurai has published a book called The Future as Cultural Fact, and he's one of the leading contemporary anthropologists. Jens Beckert is the director of the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Societies. All of them have published a number of papers, and the main content of these papers or books is the call for giving the future more attention, or to be more explicit, the basic idea, as Seligman explicitly says, is to turn upside down the way in which the respective sciences has been developed during the past century. The idea is to turn them from primarily past-oriented fields or past-oriented disciplines into primarily future-oriented fields or disciplines. And it may well be that the way in which these sciences have been developed during the past century, it may be that there was no other way. It was a needed, the focus on the past was a necessary step in order to establish them as scientific fields. But there is an accumulating evidence that something different is required now, namely the move from being primarily past-oriented to being primarily future-oriented. And much more has been published. There is a special issue of Current Sociology published just a couple of months ago, saying and presenting a number of good papers on what sociologists can say about the future from a variety of different perspective points. There are interesting novelties as far as biology or brain studies or family therapy or system engineering. So there is something in the air. A number of different scientific fields or scientific disciplines or applied fields are starting to address the problem of the future. The interesting fact is that each of them is claiming the necessity of this move from within his or her own field, without being aware that something similar is happening in a closely related field. And this has been the major motivation of the Trento conference, of the conference that we are going to organize in November. Namely, okay, something is happening, but so far what's happening is confined within different fields, without the ones knowing what the colleagues of the other department are doing. So the first step is, well, to chart the territory, to be aware of what's happening, and to put scholars from different fields in mutual connections. Maybe the same ideas have been developed from different groups of scholars, or maybe slightly different ideas, or whatever. We simply do not know. So the first step is, okay, try to understand what's happening, put different groups of scholars and scholars coming from different disciplines and fields in mutual contact, open a discussion, and from that see what happens. It may well be that from the awareness that something, a kind of shared interest is growing, well, it may well be that we are close to a major shift in the way in which human and social sciences are developed. And so that's the big underlying question mark. And a number of other activities are ongoing just these moments and in the few months and years. A group of scholars has been convened to Stellenbosch, South Africa, for discussing the issue of anticipation and complexity, which is very close to what we are today interested. But then Springer asked me to edit the handbook of anticipation, just charting what's happening and presenting the discussion and the research and the activities that are presently under development in a variety of different fields, not only human and social sciences, but also within the natural sciences or the humanities in general, but also in engineering and computer science, in architecture and design, and in the arts as well, obviously. So, which kind of lesson, which kind of result, outcome can we extract for all this? Well, to put things in a, in as short as possible way, I would say that the future is coming back to the research agenda. So far, the past has been considered a legitimate topic of research, not the future, or only marginally the future. Now, perhaps for the first time, the future is coming back to research agenda in the same moment in a variety of different disciplines. And that's extremely interesting. That's deeply interesting. So the basic idea is that we may be close to the point where we are moving the research agenda from understanding what is to understanding what is to become, which are the possibilities, the ways in which things may become different. So, as I was saying before, moving or changing the ways in which sciences, most sciences, are organized from a primary past orientation to a primary future orientation. Well, this is a pretty continuous claim, and I think that it is safe to expect a strong opposition from quotation mark traditional scholars, say database scholars. Anyway, this change is growing. I've showed you that an enormous number of papers have been recently published, and so something is happening. Let's start from this basic awareness. This change, this is also pretty interesting, shows no awareness of what the field of future studies has been doing during the past 60 years. We know that future studies is not a properly academic field, is more a field of practitioners. Nevertheless, 60 years of experience means that some experience has been accumulated, and it will be silly not to exploit the experience accumulated from future studies, even if from an academic point of view the field is almost unknown. So, why focus on anticipation right now? Well, the short answer is because human and social science, the human and social sciences are refocusing exactly now on the future. So the problem is to behave for us as a catalyst, being able to reinforce what is already happening and eventually helping this transformation in becoming from a marginal or a preliminary beginning kind of transformation into something that will become mainstream in as few years as possible. And why do this? Why should we focus on anticipation? I'm seeing at least two different reasons for that. There are many more, but at least two reasons, the two most obvious reasons are the following. A focus on the future, or focus on anticipation, may help in challenging the fragmentation of the human and social sciences. By challenging their fragmentation, we may help them to become more relevant. Anticipation for us is a fact, is the way in which many systems work. All living systems are anticipatory. Most psychological and social systems or components of them are anticipatory. So the basic issue is to recognize the empirical fact of anticipation in many different systems. But we do not have a proper understanding of what is anticipation, how it works, which laws or regularities or ways of behaving characterize anticipatory systems. So the problem is anticipation in our understanding is a proper topic of scientific research. If we understand more of the ways in which anticipatory systems work, well, it's a way of developing science. But what is anticipation in the proper sense? So far, there is no shared definition or acceptation of anticipation. So within different fields, people, scholars, address the problem of the future in different ways. My proposal, if you like, is to understand anticipation as the process of using the future in the present. And using the future in the present includes or implies at least two different attitudes or two different components. A forward-looking stance, a forward-looking attitude, together with an use of that forward-looking stance in the present. I mean, looking forward and using what you see in the present situation. So, using the future, okay. Looking at the future, anticipating, forward-looking something, but then an use of that outcome into the... I give you a very concrete exemplification in order to provide you a real feeling of what I'm trying to convey. Watching weather forecast in itself is not an anticipatory attitude in my understanding of anticipation. Watching weather forecasts and, as a consequence, taking an umbrella before going to work is an anticipatory behavior. So the forward-looking attitude together with something that is done in the present as a consequence of what has been seen in that forward-looking attitude. Of course, this doesn't mean that it will rain. If I take an umbrella with me, this is not a guarantee that it will rain. It may not rain, obviously. So the weather forecasts may be wrong. Doesn't matter. Anticipation in this sense is not a recipe for success. Does not guarantee that the world will unfold exactly that way. Nevertheless, anticipation is a major component of the way in which we, and I would say all living beings, behave. So, understanding our behavior and the behavior of other biological entities, understanding the ways in which our brain and our mind works, understanding the way in which our societies, the groups we are part of, work, is important exactly from the point of view of anticipation. Anticipation is a constitutive component of the ways in which all these systems work. So the problem is to move from a primarily reactive behavior, which may be perfect as far as physical systems are concerned, but they do not work anymore as exclusive means of explanation as far as living, psychological and social systems are concerned. So moving from a primarily reactive understanding of behavior to a primarily anticipatory understanding of behavior. That's the real challenge. And our hope is that through this transformation, by giving anticipation all the relevance it needs, an enormous variety, an enormous number of new scientific questions will arise. So that's my understanding and the understanding of those that work with me of anticipation is that it is a way of developing science. It's not something else. So if I can put it in the shortest possible way. So it's the challenge that natural systems, real systems, social systems, psychological systems ask us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberto. I would like to call on Garry Jacobs now.
Mila, thanks so much for organizing this this seminar. It's really timely for us in view of the Trento conference coming up. And my deep appreciation to Roberto, not only for participating here, but for bringing the topic of anticipation to the World Academy of Art and Science, to involving me in a meeting about 18 months ago at Lausanne, and with his group. He's been working on this with a team of people for quite some time. For participating in our program last September in Dubrovnik, in which we explored, among other things, the role of anticipation in the future of the social sciences. I'm going to try to keep well within the program limits, the time allotted. My purpose now is not going to be to make any coherent, detailed argument, but I'd like to touch on some of the reasons why I think this topic is so important to us and to the world. I'd like to start off just with a brief comment on one of Roberto's observations, and that is that the effort to turn the sciences upside down from orientation to the past to the future, I think that this is extremely important for the development of the social sciences in particular, and for me, and we did explore this in Dubrovnik, I think there's a reason for that, and that is the effort of the social sciences in the past to model themselves so much on the physical, the natural sciences, and the natural sciences are based in what is physically, what is measurable, what is observable. But when we come to the social sciences, I think it's obvious to all of us who work in the field that what has existed in the past is not a safe or reasonable basis for assuming what's going to be in the future. We are conscious beings. The Academy has 4 programs in which this subject of anticipation is not just relevant to us, but also, I think, a key and a link between those programs. And the one we will be talking about, particularly at Trento, is what we call the new paradigm, looking towards the future of humanity and solutions to the pressing challenges that are facing humanity today. And it's quite clear to us, the premise of this program is more of the same is not going to deliver the goods. More of the same is only going to aggravate the problems we have. And therefore, by definition, we've got to move from the determinism of the past to the possibilities of the future. I already mentioned our program on looking for a transdisciplinary science of society, looking at the links between the social sciences, and certainly anticipation is a common link between them, as Roberto has mentioned briefly, not only in the social sciences, but in biological sciences as well. And a third important relevance for us is the program we just completed in Dubrovnik on the subject of leadership. Rather, should have been properly named transformational leadership. And the role of the transformational leader, which is something we very much need now, is somebody who is not bound and defined and limited by what has existed in the past. He's got to be able, he, she, we, they, have got to be able to envision things that don't exist. Now, when we talk about this paradigm of anticipation, to me, there are a number of different facets that come to mind, all of which are important. Of course, trying to think about the future is not new. We've had strategic planning and management. We've had futurist studies. We've had statistical projections in all the social sciences for way back to Malthus's time. But there has been a tendency to think about the future more in terms of what we can understand of it rationally, what we can understand of it based on existing fact, what we can understand from it based on what is, rather than what can we understand from it intuitively. And of course, the greatest leaders, the greatest innovators, those who have really helped change what humanity is, have not been strictly or solely rational in their view. They have been not the opposite of rational, but I'd say they've been super-rational, or a word we more commonly use, intuitive, in perceiving things that are not yet observable or measurable or arguable rationally, but in fact are currents that are going to emerge. Clearly, anticipation is not based only on facts. It's based also on intentions. And there are other words we could use for anticipation, or at least, if not synonyms, that I think carry some of the force and importance of this concept, and that is intention, aspiration. What do we want? What are we looking for? What do we need? What do we aspire for in the future? So it shifts the focus from a material reality to what human beings are seeking in the future. It shifts the focus from matter to humanity as the real determinants of the future. It also, in a very important way, shifts the focus from objective conceptions of science, and I'm talking about the social sciences, to a science that recognizes the absolute importance of the subjective reality. Of course, psychology deals, not as much as I would like it, but it deals with the subjective reality. Too often, our other social sciences, political science, I'm thinking particularly of economics, tend to ignore the value of the subjective reality and think as if we can talk about social systems and social progress as if it's a question solely of objective factors. I think the new science that's emerging has to reunite the objective and the subjective components of our human existence, which are not as prevalent or measurable, observable, or tangible in the biological sciences as they are in the social sciences. And we've got to evolve a science in the future that gives them, that restores the legitimacy to the subjective. In our Dubrovnik conference, we had several references as an example of this to what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did during the Great Depression when he was faced with a banking crisis in which 6,000 American banks failed within a matter of a couple of years. And there was no known economic policy, no known structural or legal change that could address this issue effectively. Roosevelt, who said he had learned economics, or rather he had not learned anything in the courses in economics he took at Harvard, he got on the radio 6 days after becoming president, and he told the American people, look, the reason for this crisis comes down to one thing. We're afraid. And the real thing we have to be afraid of is our fear. That famous line, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And he said, I'm going to open the banks next Monday, and I want you to go back and deposit your money in the bank. This was not based on a, quote, rational calculation, scientific principle, or objective fact of how much money there is and why the banks are sound. It was a direct appeal to the subjective nature of human beings. So, obviously, as Roberto has already indicated with his brief introduction, this is a vast subject, but I think one of momentous importance to not only the work of the Academy, but the work of science and the future evolution of science, and therefore it's great that we could be involved with it. Anticipation involves, as I said, not only rational processes, it involves vision, values, aspirations, ideals, hopes, beliefs, as well as a rational assessment of objective facts. And the whole process of social development, social progress, which we explored in our Dubrovnik course, is driven, and we've seen is driven more by these subjective factors, or at least equally by these subjective factors, as it is to the objective ones. And anticipation announces that to us and reminds us of that at every moment. Malthus was very rational in calculating the calamity that would come from increased population growth at a time when the world only had 1 billion people. But that did not mature. That didn't happen because of many other factors. I'd say particularly during periods of radical change, and we are going through one of momentous changes, the factors of anticipation, of aspirations and perceptions regarding the future are far more important than they are during periods where things are relatively static, where from decade to decade, generation to generation, century to century, growth and change is quite predictable, where we can see the institutional social forces of the past, of conditioning, the vested interests that exist, whether they're an aristocracy or whatever they are, pretty predictably trying to maintain the status quo. But during periods of radical change, like we saw during the end of the Cold War, like the growth of the internet and all, these factors of anticipation become of greatest predominant importance, and it requires a whole review of history from that point of view, as well as a review of the way we're looking at the future today. I will wind up just by saying that in our discussion of the new paradigm, one of our intentions is to ask questions which remarkably have really not been asked too much up until now, and that is, what is the alternative to the present paradigm we have that will fulfill human aspirations more intensely, more effectively than the present prevailing systems we have, political, economic, social, cultural, governance systems, and so forth. I'm very much looking forward to the rest, to hearing from the rest of you, and I hope that all of you will join us in Trento in the fall, where we'll have much more time to explore these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Garry. At this point, I would like to ask Ilkka, Tuomi, if you can join, please.
So basically, continuing from where Garry just ended, I've been also thinking for several years now about the kind of next paradigm and this major transformation, socio-economic transformation that we have been seeing and we are kind of going through at the present. So my background is very much on let's say technology-oriented background, business strategy, and as well physics and cognitive sciences. But I've been specifically interested in the kind of impact of new technologies and innovation on the society. So on this issue of knowledge society and information society. So it seems to me that we are actually moving from this industrial system towards a new kind of socio-economic order, which is often called knowledge society. But we are talking about it and of it using old terms. So basically very much looking through the historical lenses, using concepts that used to be very important 50 years ago. We try to say what is going to happen in the future and what we should do today. So we have actually done some work on new paradigms of value creation, and my point has really been that one of the characteristics probably of this transformation is that we are moving from the historical kind of system of production where more was better, and it was very often associated with quantitative increase, volume. Volume was better in the industrial age and in the 1950s. Even in the Adam Smith's time, it was really the problem of getting rid of scarcities. But we are not in that position anymore in the industrialized world, at least. So now we have to ask what we mean by progress and what we mean by value. And that leads me to think about how we conceptualize value, and specifically then it leads to discussions about the kind of foundations of economic theory. I'm not an economist, but I've actually been working quite a lot with kind of economic theories as well. But currently, and this is my first slide, currently I'm really working on the kind of boundaries between innovation, the previous slide, please, in the boundaries of innovation and progress and policy. So currently I'm working in a project for the Finnish Agency of Innovation, which is basically the biggest funder for technology development in Finland. So we are doing a research project that tries to understand how innovation and business ecosystems evolve. And there we are using anticipatory systems theory as one of the kind of starting points for this research. But we are combining foresight and future studies and innovation studies in this project. So both trying to develop some theoretical concepts to understand what are ecosystems, kind of social ecosystems, specifically innovation, creating ecosystems, and how we could actually empirically study those. So that links innovation research and anticipation-oriented research and foresight. So one thing that I think we can learn, which in a way is kind of commonly known, but what is often forgotten, one thing that we can learn from innovation studies and history of innovation is that innovation creates things that are new. They are things that did not exist before. And this has important consequences for the way that we see future and progress. One important aspect of that is that if we create something that did not exist before, we cannot have data or facts on those things. Things that are novel and qualitatively new basically change the dimensions of the problem. They change the dimensions that we need to use to measure the phenomena in question, at hand. So we cannot and we do not have instruments to measure those qualities that will be important in the future but which did not exist before. So we try to understand how to measure and how to understand these kinds of problems. One of the kind of starting points has been really the kind of empirical observation. I think it's a kind of relatively correct empirical observations that foresight has almost always failed. So we have huge amounts of scenario studies and all kinds of forecasts, but they extremely rarely capture the interesting novel phenomena that emerge in history. This is specifically clear when we study innovation and we look innovation histories. Almost always socially and economically important innovations are disruptive, they are surprises, they are something that is unexpected. So maybe I'm overemphasizing this side, but I think it's also relatively invisible in much of the kind of theory work that deals with foresight. So technology very often in foresight studies and future studies is taken as a kind of exogenous factor. People have trajectories, they think that they can put timelines on different types of technological developments, and then within those timelines and trends and trajectories they try to understand what could be the possible futures. But we really rely very much on the idea that someone, there is an engineer or technologist somewhere who is able to provide good guesses about how the future will unfold from this technological innovation point of view. If we study the technologists and innovations themselves, we can see that this actually never happens. So the technologists and the engineers almost always miss the interesting developments. So I've been talking, using the term ontological expansion here. It means that the world really expands. The reality becomes something that did not exist before. And this, I think, is an interesting phenomena, but there's a lot of historical material kind of to support this also. So this means that the future cannot be understood as an extrapolation of the past. It's qualitatively new. And now my historical analysis, in a way, is that the past, the 20th century was really kind of dominated by the industrial system, which really, for many sociological economic reasons, was driven by making more of kind of standardized products and stuff that people really needed. So there were kind of primary scarcities that were relatively similar across the world. And you could basically do the same thing a million times over, and it was kind of good business. So this is the mass production basically, but it's the industrial organization more broadly. And now in the kind of advanced or developed economies, this is not the problem anymore. We have more stuff that we need, The question is how we make kind of meaningful use of things that we have, and even the question that to what extent we need kind of material stuff. So we are moving more towards the kind of what people have been calling meaning-based economy, but it's not material-based so much. So we don't create value anymore dominantly from raw materials, digging the stuff out of from the earth, but we are creating it from not from the environment, but from the environment. So if you look really the kind of numbers today, a lot of growing economy today is immaterial, and this has been basically not accounted at all before. So for me, anticipatory systems is really anticipatory systems theory, and I'm very much influenced and inspired also the work from Robert Rosen on anticipatory systems. But I think that kind of theory has a lot to offer to understand what sciences are, how different sciences are different, and how future enters sciences. So my next slide briefly is just an example of this. I did a study just a couple of weeks ago. I wrote a paper. This is a policy brief for the Finnish policymakers about how economic theory currently kind of incorporates the idea of future. And the point is really that it doesn't. So people say that economics is different from natural sciences because economics is based on expectations. So expectations are really very important in economic theory. But if you look a bit more carefully how expectations are actually constructed or conceptualized in economic theory, you can see that there are basically these two main approaches. The other one is the old one, which is adaptive expectations. It's really kind of cybernetic model where basically people use historical trends and predict that the world will be exactly the same as it used to be, or continuation of an existing trend. And when they find out that they were wrong, they adjust the expectations based on the error. So this is like thermostat almost. That used to be the adaptive expectations model in economics. And then in the 1970s, there was a revolution, which is called rational expectations revolution, indeed often. And it's based on the hypothesis that people have used all the information and all the facts available in the world. And this includes the best possible econometric models. And only theories, economic theories, where the expectations equal the predictions of the model are consistent. So almost all macroeconomics today is based on this idea. So this means that unexpected developments and surprises can enter economic theory only as random shocks that are not explained within the theory. So the idea is that only the kind of predictive thing is in the theory, and stuff that cannot be predicted, in a way, it's kind of thought that it's kind of natural thing that you don't have to model those. The point that I'm making here is that if disruptive innovation and if innovation in general is important for development, social and economic development, and if we know from historical studies that it is almost always dominated by surprises and unexpected findings and kind of surprising value that is found in the process of innovation, then economic theory actually misses a major part of what is really happening. So unexpected surprises, they are not only irrelevant, on the contrary, the innovation economy is based on socially and economically disruptive innovation. So current theoretical structure doesn't allow us to talk about that stuff. The consequence, I mean, one reason, briefly, if I'm saying, if we don't have facts about events that do not exist yet, and things that do not exist yet, it doesn't help if we use all available information that does not create a model which reflects the reality. It only creates a model which reflects the world where there are no surprises, there are no qualitative innovation, there are no disruption. And I think this model is really something that we need to reconsider in the knowledge era, in contrast to the industrial mass production era. Basically, this is my brief comment here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ilkka, for your wonderful presentation. I was notified that Riel Miller is here, so if I would kindly ask you to take over.
Really a pleasure to be with all of you, and I think this is an important discussion. I'll be rather brief. I think many of you know sort of the work that I've been engaged in. I think that the point of view from UNESCO in terms of a new paradigm of human development is not so much on the foreseeing part, but on the discovery of how anticipation and complexity are actually being put into practice in the world around us. So the kinds of things that I heard Garry talking about, and that Ilkka, I'm sorry I joined a little bit late, so I didn't hear Roberto. These are in effect what we're doing is we're experimenting and developing the sense-making systems we need in order to have the capacity, in a sense, to use anticipation and complexity for human development. And it was quite interesting. I was delayed because I was on the phone with a think tank in Washington, D.C. that's looking at the future of electoral systems and politics. And in that discussion, the people who were there, they said, well, you know, should we be thinking about trends? Should we be thinking about scenarios? Should we be thinking about accelerating change? And should we be, and they were confused, and they were saying that they don't really quite know how to bring the future into their deliberations. And I said, I think that's normal given the current circumstances. It's very difficult to apply anticipation to current challenges, and I think partly what Ilkka is referring to is this change in the way in which we conceptualize agency, and moving away from planning and preparation as the predominant ways of using the future is very helpful from the point of view of thinking about the integration of the future into decision making. The only problem is that the existing decision-making systems don't really have any space for anything other than preparation and planning. So they're only closed systems. And in that sense, the closed systems thinking is inadequate for human development, and it's one of the key requirements for a new paradigm of human development. And so the challenge that we face is precisely a paradigmatic break. I don't think, and those of you who know me, I won't speculate about which way things will unfold, but it seems to me that we can explore, in the context of this kind of activity in the conference coming up in November, different ways of nurturing continuous improvement in existing systems, but also the emergence and development of experiments that are extra-systemic, and also in particular exploring ways in which the extra-systemic and the existing dominant systems, the novel, interacts with the repetition. So how we grasp the relationship between repetition and difference. With all of that up for grabs, it's no wonder that it's hard to make progress. But there again, I see a particular role for this kind of activity and UNESCO, which is that as we are experimenting, as people are prototyping and testing, as a laboratory of ideas, it's something where we can begin to pick up shared frameworks, where we can begin to construct shared discourse, and in that sense, try to find some commonality in a way that's, from my perspective, very different from the way in which we've been seeking commonality in the system that was based on planning and preparation. which is that we're not looking for common denominators, statistics, aggregators, best practices, scalability, but we're looking for ways to appreciate uniqueness without being reductionist. And I think we really, at the level, I have much more confidence because I practice this in my own personal design work, at appreciating emergence and innovation, ontological expansion, as like I said, at the level of practice, at the level of communities, at the level of what people are doing. But I have really no idea, for the most part, what that looks like at an aggregated level, at a macro level, if you will. And so I think we're still really experimenting with the idea of assemblages and how do we begin to feel and think about the whole when it can't be reduced or aggregated or made understandable using the old mechanisms that we've used for a couple of centuries now. So I'll stop there. I think there's a lot of other people on the list that I see who I'm keen to hear what they have to say. So that's it for me for now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Riel. Those were very powerful points and concise. I appreciate you.
You have seen that the introduction of anticipation within a scientific perspective point changes quite a lot. It's one of the steps, to put it roughly, that helps us to move from a kind of Newton-based idea of science. I mean, an idea of science based on closed system, deterministic system, reductionism, and in which emergence doesn't make much sense, to a much broader understanding of science based on open systems in which meanings, values, emergence, and even ontological expansions, as Ilkka was saying, have a place to roll in which they can be naturally included in the broader perspective point. Okay, I will move on and give the floor to the next panelist.
Thank you so much. So I think that Ruben is here and available at this point.
I first want to say I think this meeting today this way is truly important. We need to be, those of us who are engaged in this conversation in whatever way, from whatever perspective and particular disciplines and interests, need to spend more time together virtually so that we become used to each other's language, so that we can work through some of the conceptual knots that arise simply because of different backgrounds, whether national or disciplinary or whatever. And we need a lot more of this in addition to the kinds of face-to-face meetings that the Academy in particular has been organizing, and now, of course, in Italy in the fall. So I'm entirely supportive, and I'd love to see more of it. And thank you for those of you who have done this today. Next point is that, from my point of view, this is an intensification of a conversation that is, as far as I know, at least 50 years old. That doesn't mean there's nothing new to learn here. It rather means that, as is often the case with serious human conversations that are probing into areas that are so genuinely new, that the old rules don't help, the old categories don't help, the old frames of thinking don't help, treat it like Europeans discovering what they thought was a new world, although the Aboriginals in North America would have had a different view, and still do. But 50 years after Columbus, Europeans still don't know a whole lot about what we think of as North and South America. And what we're into is a conversation that I characterize as a conversation of cultural and civilizational crisis and transformation. and that is that we're part of a small minority of people. That's my judgment in reading the literature and being part of this, who are beginning to understand, whose inclination is, and are willing to give voice to, the view that something really very profound is happening both within us and among us in this time that maps onto the following kinds of statements, although we don't all yet agree as to what the statements might mean and entail. One is that we're actually changing our mind, that you can see that leading thinkers from a whole variety of disciplines, Roberto made this point very clearly, are in the process of changing their minds about the nature of reality, about the nature of what it is for human beings to know that reality, therefore about the nature of human beings themselves and our participation in the ongoing evolution and emergence of reality, and that some of us use the language of a civilizational paradigm change, having defined both that fuzzy word paradigm and a form of civilization, to say the story we don't know. This is not a story that any government works within. That the official stories that are still told, whether at the UN officially, or at government meetings or at corporate meetings, are that a version of the cultural and civilizational story that we've inherited, namely the modern industrial story, can still be made to work, in spite of the increasing evidence that without fundamental transformation, the modern industrial world has no long-term future. It is not sustainable. And that view is developing in it's still very much a minority view, but it's developing very rapidly among scientists and others who are paying attention to this. One of the difficulties is that it's one thing to say we can no longer be what we were. It's kind of like a 14-year-old saying, I no longer want to be a child. I've had enough with childhood. I'm going to be grown up now, and a 14-year-old. The trouble is at 14, you have no mental models of either childhood or what it is to be grown up. At least you don't have adequate mental models, and you don't have mental models of the lap dissolve between them that we now characterize as adolescence in a way that's wise enough to guide your own behavior, to anticipate the kind of issues you'll be up against and guide your way through them. And as I'm sure everyone who is part of this today, they know that there are very serious discussions worldwide as well as local and national of people who get it, that sustainability does not mean we can keep the present game going, but that it must be transformed. And it's the case that they run up against an utter absence of good mental models about how do you even conceptualize and think about and probe into the evolution of whole forms of civilization. And it's not that we're not in a stage where we know absolutely nothing, but we're at a stage where kind of like Columbus touching the New Age, or Jean Cabot fishing for the British off Newfoundland in 1500, we know next to nothing about this thing that we're up against, and that therefore there is serious research that needs to be nurtured in a far more disciplined and intense way, as well as Riel has made clear, and I share this with him, a whole lot of local practice. In other words, we need to get into this both from a fresh imagination that will eventually be manifest in practice, and for those who are otherwise inclined, from those who have intuitions about new practice, who will then reflect on it to think about, well, what does this say about our way of thinking and our imagination? And so we will come at this from every conceivable direction. And this issue is not yet, as far as I know, secure on the global research agenda, whether of social scientists or national funding bodies or universities. It is rather sponsored by individuals who are related to small groups who are doing as we are doing, struggling to articulate this, to listen to each other, but all with a sense that this is historically more important because, and this will be my last comment, if you consider the long transitions in forms of civilization that we've known in the past, the transition from to living in tribal ways, which no other species on the planet does. Human beings can live in groups that are larger than any other species. If you look at the transition from tribal groups to agricultural settled groups, if you look at the transition to then to regional empires, if you look at the transition to modern industrial societies, it's true that the transitions are somewhat faster the further you get closer to modernity, but they're still measured in multiple centuries. We've been working on a modern industrial mindset and form of culture for at least 1,000 years, if you know the art and architecture and literature of Europe. The others took multiple millennia. None of us are of the view, nor is any serious researcher, that we have multiple centuries in order to work out a transition to a form of society that is both more deeply humane and sustainable. That kind of, nobody argues that. Lots of folks think that we have 100 years or more, but nobody I know who's a serious student of this work thinks that we have 2 centuries, let alone 4, let alone 6. Therefore, we're facing conundrums that I think are genuinely new in the human experience, and therefore I'm back to my first comment that this is hugely important, more important than even we ourselves may know, and I am deeply and utterly thankful for each of us who've in our own way fallen into this space and are committed to it, as well as to the immediate people who've organized this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruben. Thank you for that recognition and for valuing the gathering of the minds and hearts and what it takes to be in a community of thinkers and believers. I guess that's what you're saying. So we will come back to that at the end for sure. I would like to see if Raoul Weiler is available.
Thank you for being invited to say a few words. And so the first problem is anticipation. At what time scale do we talk and do we think? Is 2100 far away, or as the last speaker was saying, well, we need centuries to think about? Now, so this is a question. Somehow, perhaps not today, but in Trento, there should be some answers to that. Now, my horizon right now is now working on a project, a personal project on the future of food for population up to 2100, which is to a certain extent a long time still to go, but nevertheless very short in terms of climate change and sustainability. Now, the picture you see now is taken from the Wikipedia, which I love enormously, in the sense that is about 50 years what has emerged and new methodologies and sciences to accumulate knowledge about our societies. And you may see the yellow circle complexity science, which is part of the discussion of today, and at the end, the networking. And so, my first comment to what has been said is that to anticipate and to talk about the future, I think we need methods, we need instruments, we need tools to try to anticipate what is going to come. And so obviously what I'm thinking of, and there are certainly more than the ones I mentioned, is the networking, the science, the new science of networking, which has brought revelations about what our society and our activities are in certain domains at least. That's the first comment. The second is, so I recommend that you look with time at this picture. There are well-known names mentioned in that, and there's also mentioned at the upper right in blue, that what I added is the report of the Club of Rome, which designed scenarios from the 1900 to 2100, it's 200 years. And we know how that report has been criticized and still put into doubt by a number of people. But this is anticipation, and it's been done by a method, system dynamics, which was first described by J. Forrester of MIT, and I think still alive as far as I know. There are other names very well known and have written about the future. Now, when I look at civilizations, as the last speaker was mentioning, I'm really fascinated today of what robotics is going to bring to a change of our society, at least of the industrial society. And the robotics, many leaders have mentioned that in the next 20 to 25 years, which is about one generation, a short-run generation, society will look completely differently. And so I've discussed it. I try to discuss it at the university I'm coming from, and I must say that also sociologists, they are not aware of what is going on. But it may be also an example, and but nevertheless existing. There is another one. What is going on is the interaction between biology and electronics, I would say. The replacing of organs and other things. This is not new. However, it is extending at a very fast speed, that the way of looking on humans is going to change. And also, as two examples, or for one example especially, the evolution of artificial intelligence. There have been comments on that by scientists, by people, researchers, and are afraid of what could come from that direction. There is a general comment that 50 years ago or what more, there were sociologists and philosophers who have been reflecting on the philosophy of technology. And I've participated in that debate here locally, and my impression is that somehow the philosophy, the thinking on technology is although that technology is increasing and the impact on society is tremendous, that the philosophical discourse is not following that pace. So that I would see that as an element for the World Academy, but so we have to find the people for that. The philosophy of technology together and looking for another paradigms, and I would think, and in the, let's say, in the projection of sustainability issue, sustainability is a time-dependent phenomenon that for all of us. And that a paradigm shift could be that, and I think should be, but could be, that from the Anthropocene, the anthropocentric philosophy we are using essentially for 2,000 years, that is not realistic, that's not a reality. The fundamental reality, it lies rather in an eco-biocentric society. That would be that would be a solution or a scenario possible for anticipating and well, the let's say orientation that we should try to convene to our leaders. So as a final final comment or input to the further discussion is about the sciences of networks and complexity. They do exist, let's say, for about 20-30 years now. And especially the networking has brought new insights in social sciences, but also in other phenomena. And I give one example to close that input, my input, is that when we look at the internet and try to figure out what the distribution is of the communication along that internet, then the spontaneous reaction be that it probably would be some statistical Gaussian relationship, and this is not true. This it has been discovered by Barabasi, especially that it follows a totally different law. There are laws in describing that complex systems, and so which is now called, the name is a power law. However, this seems to be much more general. Also, in bacterial world, the metabolism of very small organisms is a bacteria. That is a complex system and has a similar law, a parallel law, as that of the internet. So our societies, there have been articles written about is it necessary to have elections if we do an analysis of or post-analysis of the results that what is society is living. What we have seen in in disruptions happening in our society, the banking world had applied, if it had applied, maybe hopefully they do now, science of networking. Maybe it would be possible to have avoided such situations. So I think that in the discussion, anticipation and complexity, we should have attention to which methods can be applied or which have to be invented. The general considerations, they are very useful, but somehow let's say the ongoing evolution, we have to have a grip on it, and even in terms of scenarios. And I close with the word of scenarios. The report by the Club of Rome in 1972 described 13 scenarios. This is not forecasting. These are scenarios, thinking pattern, and it is in that direction I'm working, and I try to bring about some new or interesting considerations about the food problematic by the year 2100. So far, my contribution up to now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raoul, and especially thank you for actually starting up the series on complexity. We had forums and a webinar before that you convened, so I appreciate that, and especially our next speaker, Jüri Engelbrecht, also was participating at that time in the discussions on complexity. So right now I would like to invite Jüri to join us.
From that point where Raoul actually ended up there that these complex systems and the networks, that well, actually social order actually is not a very stable phenomenon. And the main question to understand it is actually the question of meanings and how we understand it and how it could be applied in practice, and that brings all this uncertainty. I would like to thank Roberto Poli very much for this introductory talk about the examples and for example, this weather forecast. The point is actually the weather can't be forecasted also for a long run. And the prediction in physical systems is really quite important. However, we have to not to forget that even Niels Bohr, about 100 years ago or more, said that prediction is very difficult, especially if it is about the future. So that this is something that we really sometimes we forget. And another point that this is not understood in the society is what was said by Armin Toffler about 30 years ago about these reductions and these problems that we are very good. He said that to split up the problems into the small pieces and then to solve them, it's as a reductionism. But we are so good that we very often forget to put the pieces back together again. And this is what is actually, well, the main question in how to see the future and how to build up the future. Actually, these examples also given by Raoul, that's internet and bacteria and all that, this is quite clearly understood by these physical notions. It's a power law, and it is really needed for very many systems. I tried to find, when Mila actually asked me to join this webinar, that I tried to find some kind of papers or the models, and somebody from Amsterdam, Weiler, who has used the simple logistic equation, but not based on the past, but also involving the future. This is a very simple model. Certainly, one could build up the hierarchies in it. It's good, it's a better, but nevertheless it's far from the reality. Nevertheless, it gives some kind of basic understanding in the program. And then to use this, what is known, for example, in nonlinear dynamics, these random shocks that was mentioned by Ilkka, Tuomi, for example, in terms of nonlinear dynamics, these are called intermittent processes, so that it is quite clear how they happen in physical systems. But if we come to the much more complicated systems like economy or social system, this is something that we have to learn yet. And to end up this, I think that my wish from my personal view is really to understand some kind of basic dynamics in it, that at least some basic cases, and then try to somehow to modify them to meet the reality. And the other hand is that I think that whatever we speak at these conferences on anticipation and about the importance of understanding it, it is the program, as it's usual, how to reach the decision makers so that they could understand actually that also that how important it is to when we think about the global social challenges or the governance and the new paradigm. This is how important it is to understand it on the scientific ground, and then to really to build up on this sort of proper models and the proper expectations. So thank you.
I got notified by Roberto that he had to leave. He had sort of an emergency, and he apologizes for it. My dear colleague from India, Janani, asked that she have a minute to also speak. So, Janani, if you want to take over, please.
Thank you, Mila. Thank you for accommodating me. Hello, everyone. I'm Janani, and it has been very good to hear from all of you on this fascinating subject. I would just like to very briefly talk about the revolution of rising expectations. This term was coined by the former president of the World Academy, Harlan Cleveland, to describe rising human aspirations that actually are a compelling driving force for development and economic advancement. This process was seen in Asia in the 1950s, and it continues to be seen even today in many movements in different parts of the world. Now, this rising expectation is not a thing of the past. It is an anticipation of the future, an aspiration. The entire process of accomplishment, it begins with aspiration. Human aspiration releases energy. And aspiration is mainly an attraction of the future, the desire to go beyond the present. If we just look at the past, it is very hard to conceive that we can move to a new paradigm because we think of the status quo. If everyone had gone by the past, colonialism would not have ended, the United Nations would not have been formed, the Cold War would never have ended. Now, all of this is possible because we are able to uncork the future. Now, this uncorking the future, it is a term that was used by Alexander Likodolov at the recently concluded course conducted by the Academy and the World University Consortium on effective leadership. Now, one of the main themes that came up in this course was transformational leadership. The role of the effective leader is to anticipate the future. So, for the transformational leader and for the new paradigm that the World Academy is championing, anticipation is very integral. Thank you, Mila.
Oh, thank you very much, Janani. That was on point and concise, and I'm glad you put that topic on the table as well. What we're looking at here now is as an understanding that the question of anticipation as it is related to vision, intuition, as well as the question of the development of consciousness. Then we addressed its relationship to sustainability, as well as technology and policy. So, as we have always worked in the Academy in a kind of interconnected and vitally interconnected way amongst different spheres of human existence and human condition, we have brought here, as well as that wonderful network of issues in their interdependence and complexity. So, just to open up the floor for everybody, please send your comments.
Thanks to all of you for inviting me to this panel. I participated for the first time in Dubrovnik, and I'm very pleased to have heard also what today's topic is all about. I have met Ruben and Garry 3 years ago in Geneva, and I look forward to be in Trento and contribute. I didn't have time enough to actually have a presentation, but it has been very inspiring to listen to all of you, and I would like to make 3 points that seem very important to me. I'm more a practitioner than an academist, so I really believe that working on our intentions, being present to each other, seeing each other, sharing our thoughts is actually probably one of the ways to uncork the future. As we meet, as we are close together, probably a lot of new emerging thoughts can come up. It is true for our group, and it is true for humanity, and the social networks will allow us to accelerate these processes of sharing our thoughts, sharing our convictions, sharing our values, and sharing our intentions. And I think we within WAAS and within the groups of the thinkers and the people who are convinced that we can uncork the future, we should be aware and available to participate and co-create that future. On the other hand, maybe one of the biggest questions came in the person who last presented is, how do we reach the current decision makers? And maybe there are some very soft ways to just be there, be silent next to them, coach them, listen to them, create safe spaces so that they can be all they can be, so that they can co-create and co-contribute to the intentions of those who are already active in these topics. There's a very interesting book that just came out from Geneva-based professor Gilbert Probst about tackling complexity, the systemic approach for decision makers. I think that's probably the way. The book is not good enough, but it's a good start. It is through people, it is through interactions, relationships, that we can probably influence each other and align our intentions. And probably it will be happening with the sustainable goals that the UN will bring together for all the organizations, businesses, governments in September 2015 will be one of those big intentions that almost all of humanity, thanks to the technology and thanks to the thinkers who will talk and address these topics on a daily basis, will probably be humanitarian intention. And I'm sure this will contribute to federate and accelerate the process. So I'm looking very much forward to continue to work on a presentation and share more insights with you. I think the environment that was talked about is very important. Can we envision a better future? Do we believe in a better future? And the more we will be connected on envisioning that better future, the more it will be able to happen. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Philip. Thank you very much. We have a couple of other volunteers that would like to speak. I would like to quickly make a note, if you don't mind, a couple of my own comments. I appreciate, especially Philip, your comments about coming together and sharing. One of the things that concerns me here is the question that I asked at the very beginning is who gets to decide, and who can afford to put forward their vision, who can even afford to come to the conference in Trento to speak in very concrete terms. And Jüri also mentioned that. So one of the things that are on my mind is listening at one point to Mark Swilling speak at Club of Rome, a meeting where he spoke about the notion of colonizing future and the kind of this anxiety about who gets to determine the common good and the common future. And as far as decision makers are going, in terms of recent leadership and transformational leadership course that was taught in Dubrovnik, and that thread of discussion, the question is becoming more about empowering and realizing ourselves as those stakeholders and decision makers, rather than always looking at them and how we can persuade them. That more proactive approach that we put ourselves in that co-creative place and participatory place that Philip has mentioned. So this is a lot about that creation of common worldview and also in combination with the personal attitude and sense of significance and purpose in the world that mobilizes those energies and forces for a sense of agency, of which I think, if I remember correctly, either Riel, he was speaking about. So I would like to right now call on Garry, please.
I enjoyed the many comments from the other speakers. I would just like to, without taking too much time, come back to a couple of them. One, I was very appreciated Ilkka's comments about economic theory not incorporating the future. When I mentioned that we had at least 4 WAAS projects that were directly related to the issue of anticipation, I should have said 5, and the economic theory is one of the most important of them. And I found his comments particularly interesting. It was interesting from the perspective of technology that he was talking about economically disruptive innovations. In our leadership course in Dubrovnik, we had a talk on disruptive leadership, and we're really talking about politically disruptive, if you could call them. We didn't use the word innovations. And I'm raising this just to make the point that I think that what Ilkka said about technology as having economic implications is true of is one of one category or one of a class of phenomenon that have profound impact not only on economy but on policy and on society, including changing perceptions, whether they're positive or negative, as we saw after the Great Crash and the Great Depression was a negative example. Interestingly, talking about disruptive innovations, at the Dubrovnik meeting, Janani briefly mentioned the name of Alexander Lipitov, the president of Green Cross, who was the press secretary for Gorbachev during his last years as president of the Soviet Union. And he told us that 2 days before the fall of the Berlin Wall, just 2 days, neither Gorbachev nor Chancellor Kohl had any idea that the Berlin Wall would fall within the next years. And then he went on to say that 1 month before, or 2 months before the reunification of Germany, Gorbachev, Bush, and Kohl met, and they talked about the fact that the reunification of Germany was probably something that would have to wait for future generations. So what Ilkka talked about, the disruptive innovation, I think is part of a larger category of disruptions which are becoming ever more possible and ever more frequent and likely with the kind of rapid changes that we see today. And as a final remark, I was very glad that Janani spoke and mentioned Harlan Cleveland's contribution on revolution of rising expectations, because it really, in our discussions on new paradigm, we have really flagged this as one of the most powerful factors that's going to impact on what type of paradigm emerges and when it emerges. And whenever we meet the natural skepticism that we all have about can the Berlin Wall fall, or can Germany be reunified, or can we really change our economic paradigm or our political paradigm, it's very helpful to remember how powerful this force can be when it's released. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Garry. I think Gilbert is ready.
Well, I just wanted to make a short comment. I found the discussion fascinating, although some of the things we have been discussing for a few decades now, but there are many things new also. And one of the things that have been mentioned, and I wanted to emphasize a little more, is that the world is now changing drastically, not only because of this increasing complexity, increasing speed of change, but also because of increasing connectedness between countries, between cultures, and between the ecosphere, between the ecosphere, the biosphere, and the social sphere, if you wish.
So that leads to a unprecedented, maybe increasing uncertainty, and that requires new paradigms for thinking, but also for acting. It's very different to act when you are more or less convinced of what will happen and what will be the consequences of your action, and to act when you are aware of this uncertainty. And that has been explored quite a lot in the field of adaptive environmental management and natural resources. And now the point is for me that the change we are witnessing and being part of is more than a civilizational transition. It is a planetary, in the sense of the Earth system, paradigmatic change in the whole integrated system, the socio-ecological system formed by the ecological subsystem and the natural subsystem, that is in a new state. For the first time in the history, that the rationality, the logic of economic globalization is joining and interacting with the logic of ecological connectedness. And we have not only climate change, but we have a lot of social and migration and changes and effects associated, cannot be dissociated from the natural and the social. And so the point that I want to emphasize is how to deal, that had not been discussed in depth here, how to deal with irreducible uncertainty and true novelty, because historically uncertainty was treated with probability theories that, assuming that we know at least the probability distribution, but there are now we are in a situation in which irreducible uncertainty that cannot be obtained, reduced, or eliminated with more data and more studies, and true novelty are becoming prominent. And that has deep consequences for understanding and for acting, and for anticipation and for sustainability. And this is one of the, I identified 11 basic challenges, epistemological challenges to science and technology of the new situation, and this dealing with uncertainty is one of them. That is what I want to emphasize, the issue of uncertainty that actually is connected with all the things that have been discussed here before. Thank you very much.
Gilbert, I am deeply grateful that you joined us. Those were very powerful comments, tying so many threads and asking even more powerful questions, kind of probing even further. I particularly appreciate the note about the interconnection between ecological developments and social being. This is simultaneous and planetary change. I tend to quote a very influential theoretical biologist, very, very influential, but that he's not very known in popular circles, even in academia. His name is Jacob von Uxküll, and he's actually the grandfather of Jacob by the same name, who has founded World's Future Council. And the grandfather, the biologist, spoke of he's the founder of biosemiotics pretty much, who spoke about this personal Umwelt, about this microenvironment in which we all live and the way we interact, tying both our social lives, our biological condition, as well as interconnection between environmental, neural, and greater webs, in which we have been all seen, and I mean all life forms in their own way have been seen as readers of signs, of our own and each other's signs. So it's a very powerful question that you asked about the irreducible uncertainty in the place from which we are able to even perceive each other as well as our own condition. It's more of a something that I wanted to put in on the table rather than draw a conclusion. But it's very relevant because Jakob von Upschool, a junior I should call him, is the one whose measure of knowing and acting in the world, as you, Gilbert, said, is exactly keeping an eye always on generations that it will inherit the earth, who actually are the future stewards of the earth and inheritors. And that's his guiding principle, even through uncertainty, knowing what it is, in what kind of condition we need to leave the planet in order for others to be able to savor it, like we have tried our best. So do let me know if there are other comments, please.
Well, as to what Winston was saying about uncertainty, well, it's a very interesting question. And my personal opinion is that when there was a feeling of certainty in the past, there was an important input from religions. I'm speaking at least for the western part of the world. And that decline, which I consider as very important and useful, puts the human being and the human thinking in a totally different perspective. It is so that for 2,000 years, Western, or the people belonging to the religions of the book, have lived for another world than the one they are living in. And so when I speak and I mention the eco-biocentric world in opposition to the anthropocentric one, of which I spoke in Montenegro, by the way, that is that shift that is going on. So I think humanity is getting closer to its own origins, and the origins are in nature. Nature in the sense of biological nature, but beyond that. And a very inspiring person, scientist, which I love very much, is James Lovelock, who wrote what in the beginning was a theory, the hypothesis of Gaia, and afterwards, well, somewhat said it's a theory. He gives a fair description of where we are standing. And he wrote a new book very recently. And I think that uncertainty is right and is not right. It is a transition, in a way, from what one believed and what now we consider, or we know much better from where we are coming from. And then, okay, then the question is where we are going to. So I leave that for anyone. I give my opinion that in the past they were thinking that they were going to heaven, and so, and that's over now. So I didn't want to have a discussion on religion. I just want to have on the fundamentals on which our civilization, Western civilization, has been built on. And this is, I think, a very fundamental question to talk about it. It goes further than my first ideas about the methodology, which is quite differently. The methodology is a need, is a tool to get some preciser picture of what's going on. But the philosophy or the fundamentals, these are, this is reflection and thinking. And I hope that goes on. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments, please? Or responses to what has been shared? I would like to notify you all that, as always, some of you are participating for the first time. As always, we record our sessions and then they're posted on our website, on our YouTube channel. Most of the time also featured in other social media and remains as a permanent record of our gathering. If you will be very soon receiving from me a kind of a follow-up email that thanking you for participation, but also it might be enhanced by a link to this recording. And our colleagues in India are very efficient. They very quickly turn around and post these things. That's one note for you. Second note is, again, to remind you that you can send more notes or more comments, abstracts, or your presentations, and we'll collect them all. And finally, please, by all means, do consider submitting proposals for the conference in Trento if you already haven't done so, to any other sessions. As I have mentioned already, Garry and Winston are organizing a session on deep drivers for the new paradigm and anticipation. And I have called a session on Bring Forth Futures that wants to gather voices from all over and all across disciplines, all across regions, all across concerns, I should say, as well as arts, hopefully, and visionary voices, so as a potential for future book project. So these are notes for potential spaces where you can take this discussion further, and we can, if there is enough interest, and do notify me of that interest for sure. As Roberto suggested, because he's excited, we could have another webinar before the conference, and most certainly we can have a follow-up webinar after the conference and see potentially what kind of projects we can develop. Thank you so much. I'm feeling really privileged and honored to be able to do this, and as Philip and Ruben and everybody else has affirmed, this was much needed, that we make an effort to see each other in whatever possible way and hear each other. So I deeply thank you for your time, for your thoughts, for your own aspirations, and for your own goodwill towards more humane future, as Ruben called us to walk toward. I wish you all the best. I hope to see you very soon, and most certainly would love to see you at the conference. All the best.